everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to talk to you about Manx fairy tales. I will be talking primarily about two books. They're the only two books I own in this genre or category. Manx Fairy Tales by Sophia Morrison, recently illustrated by Julia Ashton Smith and published in 2013, and Ghosts, Bugganes, and Fairy Pigs, and I will get into the details of these two books, why and how they exist. It's a pretty long story, but it's very interesting, and I kind of want to take you on this journey with me because learning about the process has been so enriching for me, at least, and I just really enjoyed the fairy tales so much more. So I got both of these books from this independent bookshop in the Isle of Man called Bridge Bookshop, and when they sent me the books, they sent me this really nice card and with all the information. I will link down below their website, their Facebook. They're very active on Facebook and just lovely and funny, and they always have such great book displays, and they've been so accommodating with COVID and everything that's been happening. And like I mentioned in a previous video, it's very important to support independent bookshops, especially the ones that are in such isolated places. So I have to admit that I first saw this as a sort of ad on Twitter, and I saw these two books and I didn't even know what Manx meant. And I feel kind of embarrassed now. But just to baby step through this as I did, the Isle of Man is located in the Irish Sea between Ireland, Scotland, and England and Wales. If you were to trace back the Manx language in the Proto-Indo-European language chart, you would actually find it under Celtic rather than Germanic. And this is important for later because the Germanic languages kind of split up into with the North and the West. And in the West you have English and Frisian and Dutch. And then in the North ones you have all the Scandinavian divisions. Now the reason I'm mentioning this is that while the language belongs more towards the Irish side, its heritage contains both Viking history, Celtic history, English history, and Germanic history. And all of this is combined, and it shows so strongly in their mythology, in their folklore, in their fairy tales. And you will see kind of voices and echoes from things that we've encountered in Icelandic fairy tales, for example, which I'll get into a little bit later. So in 1901, there was a newspaper in the Isle of Man, and they were kind of looking to gather stories from people, anything they might know, oral traditions, any kind of tidbits that could pertain to the Manx cultural heritage. Now, according to the introduction of this book, we find that what was posted in the Isle of Man Examiner on September 21st, 1901, was a request for anyone to submit any information that they might find on Manx language, Manx history, Manx biography, antiquities, folklore, place names, natural history of the island, and kindred subjects. And at the time, this man who had both German and English heritage, his German name is Karl Roeder, even though on Wikipedia you find him under Charles Roeder because he was very popular in the folklore circles in England. He was kind of interested in Manx fairy tales and folklore, and he started gathering stories and submitting them to the Examiner. But most of these fairy tales actually came to him from this other man called Edward Farragher. Now, Farragher is a lot more outlined in the sort of cultural history of the Isle of Man because he wasn't local, he wasn't from abroad, and he produced a lot of creative work himself. He was self-taught and he lived by the coast, and even though he only had very little formal education, he kind of read on his own and then wrote over 4,000 poems and ballads and lyrics by himself. And then he became a fisherman. And when he became a fisherman, he gathered even more stories and tales that had to do with mermaids and merfolk and, sailor legends. There's a lot of superstition out at sea anyway. But this island being an island and surrounded by the sea and having all of these mer stories kind of related to us through him, is very unique, and their uniqueness comes from this beautiful blend of having Norse influence or Nordic Viking influence and Celtic Irish influence, while at the same time containing kind of English resembling ballads. Farragher and Roeder continued to contribute up to 90 issues, all the way up until October of 1903. So this was just about 2 years of continually posting things about little tidbits here and there about anything to do with Manx folklore. And eventually in 1904, all of it was kind of collected and published as one book, but it was very fragmented. So these notes and queries didn't really make cohesive sense because some of them were repeated, some of them were told in a different way from a different place, some were just little tiny paragraphs or little tiny poems. So let's put a pin in this one for a bit. Farragher and Roeder collected these stories and published them in the south of the island, whereas in the west, Sophia Morrison started collecting stories and fairy tales, but she went about it more in the Grimm Brothers tradition. She would go and interview individual households and people and anyone in the town who might have any stories from Peel and from the surrounding region. And as she collected stories, she kept detailed notes, she would do doodles and drawings, and all of this has been preserved in the museum. So in 2011, it had been exactly 100 years since the publication of Sophia Morrison's fairy tales. So that's why they reprinted it. And this time they added the wonderful illustrations of Julia Ashby Smyth. I will link her artist website down below. She is incredible. She has a wonderful Instagram as well. And her artwork, like, I don't know if you can see the cover very well because of the lighting, but my God, her artwork is just phenomenal. And as recently as last year, they published a kind of cohesive collected queries and notes from all of those columns long ago that Farragher and Roeder put together. So if you read the full title, it says Ghosts, Buganes, and Fairy Pigs, Karl Roeder's Manx Notes and Queries. And the introduction to this book really goes in depth into how these were gathered and how they were organized, which is very useful when going through it. Otherwise, you're left kind of wondering why nothing makes sense and why everything is just so fragmented. Sometimes you come across a puzzle or a riddle. So for example, here's a riddle. As I looked over my father's castle wall, I saw the dead carrying the living away. And the solution is supposed to be a ship. But first you get it in kind of Manx and in the riddle way it's being told, and then you get a translation. So these can vary in presentation, and it's very helpful to sort of know the backstory in order to appreciate it. And here on the back you see the picture of Roeder and here Farragher. Okay, so what stood out? The first story that got my attention was the one about the Manx Cat. I actually didn't even know there was such a thing as a Manx Cat in real life, but there's a breed of cat called the Manx Cat that has no tail, and it looks like it just got chopped off. So a lot of the stories have to do with how did the cat lose its tail. And at first I thought, oh, we're gonna get these great etiological tales explaining how the Manx Cat lost its tail, and instead it's a Noah's Ark story. And the lesson is that the cat was just too lazy to get on the ark and took its sweet time, and by the time Noah said, okay, I'm closing the ark, just then the cat started walking towards the ark, but it was just in time, and the door shut on its tail, and it chopped it off. And that's how the cat lost its tail. And it's supposed to be like a joking saying that it has to do a lot with laziness, and this laziness concept shows up again and again in various fairy tales. There's a lot of stories like The Lazy Wife, or tales begin with, oh, there was this husband and he had a lazy wife, or vice versa, and then they try to figure out what to do with them because they're just so lazy, and they get the fairy realm involved. Two very prominent figures are Finn McCoyle, and he is sort of Irish, and there's a lot of things to do with St. Patrick visiting the Isle of Man, and Finn McCoyle being kind of this presence or hero that's a little bit more Celtic Irish. And of course, Manannán. So Manannán is from the sea, and the island is called Isle of Man after him. And the passages with him are just so beautiful because there's something just absolutely magical in the way they're being described. And it's not necessarily that something happens in most of them, as much as it's just kind of a setting. So for example, Manannán Mac-Ilair, the son of the sea, was the first ruler of Man. He was a great wizard. He was so powerful that afterwards he looked on as a god. He had a great stone, Fort on Peel Island, and he could make one man standing on its battlements seem to be 100. Skip, skip, skip. You go down, and everything is just described. You don't get anything else other than just a scene description. You get to sentences like, the island was a happy place, full of sunshine and nothing but pleasant things. No one was old, tired, or sad. You might wonder what a Begain is. I did too, and to be honest, I was not sure how to even pronounce that. However, this book comes with a CD, and it has only a few of the tales in here on CD, but it's read in the most outstanding way with music, and it gives you chills. But one of them is the one about the Begain. And a Begain is a hybrid of an ogre and a Swedish troll. So it's kind of monstrous and large, and you're supposed to fear it. And it's from this other realm, and it appears as a form of punishment for people, or to stop them from achieving their goals in some way. It shows up in various ways throughout these fairy tales, but that's something that's a very particular Manx creature. And set up at the very beginning of the Sophia Morrison book, we get an introduction to the little ones, or themselves. So this might sound familiar, but listen up. There is at least one spot in the world where fairies are still believed in, and where if you look in the right places, they may still be found, and that is the little island from which these stories come, Elanvanen, the Isle of Man. But I have used a word which should not be mentioned here. They are never called fairies by the Manx, but themselves, or the little people, or the little fellows, or the little ones, or sometimes even the little boys. And like the Huldu folk of Iceland, they seem to be very mischievous and mess with people. One thing that I noticed in the collection of these, like when I read about Roeder and Morrison, is that people seem to be very possessive and secretive about these folk tales and these stories. They almost didn't even want to share their ballads and hymns with them back in the day. There was something very precious and private about these tales, and at one point I was wondering if I would even be allowed to make this video, even though it's, you know, it's 100 years ago. Now, of course, they're very proud of these fairy tales and they're celebrating this cultural heritage. So if you have read other books like it, please link them down below. I would be very happy to find more books, especially from little secret places around the world. And since it is from 1911, if you're looking just for the text of this and not the newly illustrated with the CD one, it is on Project Gutenberg. It's in the public domain, so I will link that below as well, because it has been over 100 years and the author has been dead for a really long time. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!